Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm going to talk about Vengeance Demon Hunters and Dragonflight. I spent about 6 hours yesterday repairing a toilet and cleaning a bathroom floor, and it was disgusting. But you know what's even more disgusting? Vengeance Demon Hunters. They are so good. Although Prot Warrior is getting all the love and attention from the community right now, or the cries for nerfs, I think the Demon Hunter is right there with them in the insanely overpowered department, and I feel like no one is going crazy about how good DH is like they are with Warriors. This video is about beta content at level 70. I mainly want to talk about talents and how the class plays, particularly compared to how it's working right now in Shadowlands. If you'd like a pre-patch guide, I have that linked in the pinned comment. And as for a Dragonflight guide, that'll be coming once the release is closer. So let's start by going over the differences between level 60 and level 70 Vengeance Demon Hunters. You lose your Covenant ability and your legendary power, but if you're playing Kyrian and using Collective Anguish, you're very easily able to get both of those back through the talent tree. There is currently a bug with Elysian Decree that's very annoying, not game breaking, but really annoying. If you use Elysian Decree in a macro, the game references the Covenant ability, not the talent, and you will not be able to use it. Not a huge issue, but pretty irritating. It makes me have to rebind everything for the way I've been playing it for several years. You do lose the Covenant Legendary and the Mechanicos Soulbind traits, so Elysian Decree isn't quite as strong as it was in Shadowlands, but it really is pretty close. And in general, you're just picking up a bunch of great value-adding talents as you progress deeper into the tree here. This is all great. There are a lot of really high value defensive talents near the bottom of the tree that you couldn't afford in Shadowlands, and you are able to pick them up now, in addition to being able to buy back most of the major high value bonuses that you would lose by leaving Shadowlands. It's all upside. That's Vengeance Demon Hunter in a nutshell. So now let's just jump in game and play around in the level 70 talent tree. Alright, I am logged into the beta and I am looking at my talent tree. I've taken 5 points out of each tree just to sort of give a simulation of, roughly what I've been running at level 60, just so there's sort of a before and after comparison here. This is my Mythic Plus setup. Let me get that out of the way. This is my Mythic Plus setup. I have 3 talent trees to show off here, Mythic Plus, and then Raid Single Target and Raid AoE. And the main difference between Mythic Plus and Raid AoE is just simply, in Mythic Plus, you're going to want to take some of these nice utility pieces here, like Imprison, which, you're probably not ever going to get any value in Raid out of Imprison or Consume Magic or Sigil of Silence. So this is more or less what I've been running. Now let's just take a look at what I've changed over to use here for Mythic Plus. Mythic Plus pretty much just dropped down this line and taken all of these nodes over here. 3% mastery, it's not great. 6% magic damage taken is not a bad node. Just 6% more health is not a bad node. These are fine nodes, but the fact that they're these gatekeeping things on the way down to these excellent capstone traits is a little annoying. If they were up higher in the tree, I think these would be much easier to swallow. You have to take them, but they are a little bit disappointing on the way down to the bottom. In general, these talents are pretty good though. Erratic Fellheart is maybe the weakest of all of these talents down here at the bottom. Soul Sigils, I'll come back to in a second. Erratic Fellheart shaves a few seconds off the cooldown of Infernal Strike. Now you'll notice I've dropped Meteoric Strikes over here in this tree. Not really to compensate. I think, you're going from a 12-second cooldown with just Meteoric Strikes to a 16-second cooldown with both points in this. It's kind of crazy how much worse this is for 2 points than just this for 1. A bit of a bummer, but Collective Anguish adds so much damage onto your Fell Devastation that it's worth it. It's worth doing that to get down here. I've left this choice node underneath the Hunt, which is an amazing offensive cooldown, tons of damage in single target, and a pretty decent amount of AoE damage. It also, as you can see, gives you 50% leech on your primary target for 30 seconds, and then it lasts for 30 seconds and has a 90-second cooldown, which is great and synergizes pretty nicely with the rest of the kit. But you'll see that these choice nodes, 30% more damage on the damage over time effect. The damage over time effect is relatively minor in the grand scheme of all of your total damage output. Similarly, Relentless Pursuit requires you to actually kill stuff while that damage over time effect is on them, and then you can get some cooldown reduction. This could be useful in some cases in like some real AoE slamming, AoE DPS, you know, slamming out a bunch of ads, but then you have to give up something like Quicken Sigils, which is a pretty direct damage and CC value increase in any sort of Mythic Plus situation. Cooldown reduction on Sigil of Silence, cooldown reduction on Sigil of Misery, cooldown reduction on Sigil of Flame, cooldown reduction on Elysian Decree. You don't want to give that up. And Collective Anguish, huge burst damage increase. Huge. And not RNG at all. So this set of capstone talents kind of duds. I don't think they're really ever going to get used. Like I said, I would get back to Soul Sigils. This talent says, afflicting an enemy with a sigil generates 1 lesser soul fragment. And if that's the way it worked, it would rule. Right now, it maybe it is as intended, maybe this is nebulous language, but afflicting an enemy with a sigil generates 1 lesser soul fragment, whether you hit 50 enemies with a sigil or 1 enemy. You only get 1. That's very disappointing. So having played around with that, I think it's probably not worth running most of the time. I don't really like Darkness in Mythic Plus just because this is a great talent in Raid. It's really nice to be able to get, you know, people to come step in and get a big damage reduction effect, you know, RNG, but still pretty good for a tank to be able to give out a major Raid defensive cooldown. In Mythic Plus, getting people to actually stack up and take part in this, not so much. So I've been running more or less this in the left side of the tree. In the right side of the tree, I did drop Meteoric Strikes. It's useful as a damage increase, but I think that there are some better options down here deeper in the tree. You don't really need the cooldown reduction for mobility most of the time in Mythic Plus. So this is sort of like one talent that you can sacrifice to pick up some value elsewhere. Spirit Bomb, pretty essential for any AoE situation. You're going to want this. It just does so much more damage than pure Soul Cleave for any AoE, you know, it's pretty essential. And it does change your rotation pretty heavily from being just, you know, you generate Fury, you spend it with Soul Cleave, you generate, spend over and over, to you build up a stack of 4 or 5 souls, you eat them, and then you can immediately dump some Fury while you have no souls with Soul Cleave, and then repeat building up those souls and eating them with Spirit Bomb. There's just so many good talents in this tree, particularly in Mythic Plus. Like, you have Calcified Spikes giving you a pretty significant amount of base damage reduction when Demon Spikes falls off, which previously you would just get kind of dump trucked when Demon Spikes falls off. You also have Extended Spikes, which is optional. I think it's really, really good in Mythic Plus, getting extra duration on Demon Spike. So you get 8 seconds of it instead of 6. And just to show off the armor difference here, this is just sitting in Orgrimmar, so this isn't entirely accurate or representative of exactly how well it'll scale in Mythic Plus, but like 31% damage reduction without spikes, 44% with. So it's about 14 or more, 14 to 15% damage reduction. Getting an extra couple of seconds on every single one of those is really good, especially with the synergy that you get from Feed the Demon, where you're getting more cooldown reduction. So you're getting a very substantial increase in your Demon Spike's uptime between these two talents. And that wasn't really something you were able to afford at level 60. So it feels pretty great. It really, you know, you're definitely nowhere near a warrior in terms of the ability to mitigate physical damage, but it helps close that gap a lot. Fallout is a talent that just gives you like a lot more resource generation in AoE. You can run it in single target still, but it's really, really nice to have in AoE. Similarly, Volatile Flame Blood, it gives you a lot more resource generation, especially in AoE. Having both of these is pretty great. Burning Blood is one of the most optional talents here. 10% more fire damage. Maybe half of your damage output is fire. Probably more in AoE. Like if I just look at my most recent little run here, just full run breakdown of overall damage. Spirit Bomb is fire damage. Feldev is fire damage. Elysian Decree is not. Immolation Aura is. High Beam is chaos, which I believe is supposed to count. Sigil of Flame, yeah, you know, a little over half. So this is about 5% more damage for 2 points. Droppable, you could drop a point and take Meteoric Strikes. You could drop a point and take Last Resort if you feel like you're in need of that cheat death at all. I was playing around with running Painbringer. I have dropped that out just for like sort of a in-between, but basically I see you have 3 talents here that are all 2-pointers and are all relatively good value for the investment. And that would be Extended Spikes, which I think is the most consistent defensive value. Burning Blood, which is obviously the most consistent offensive value. And Painbringer, which is really good defensive value at times, especially like after you do a big Spirit Bomb combo and then you Elysian Decree and then you Spirit Bomb again. Now you've got like 8 or 10 stacks of Painbringer rolling. That's 2% damage reduction per stack. That's pretty great. But then sometimes, you know, right at the start of pulls, or maybe all your cooldowns of, you know, you've kind of blown them all, you've gotten that big surge of Painbringer stacks and then they've fallen off. Maybe you're only like 2 or 4 stacks of Painbringer. It's a little less consistent. In Raid, where you're just sort of generating and consuming pretty regularly, I think that this talent is actually quite a bit more consistent. Which doesn't necessarily make it better, you know, damage intake isn't always consistent either. But I do think this one is a little bit lower value unless you're dealing with spell damage, then it way overtakes Extended Spikes. I haven't really said much about the right side of the tree. I like Meteoric Strikes. The 2 talents below it are pretty bad. Fell Flame Fortification is like okay. You have pretty high uptime on Immolation Aura. So having some more magic damage reduction in conjunction with this and with Calcified Spikes and maybe Painbringer and so on, like that's okay, but this is probably some of the lowest value for the investment. And there are just so many talents over here on the right side of the tree that are contingent on cooldowns, which would be fine if the cooldown reduction model of Demon Hunter from Shadowlands had carried forward. Fiery Brand increases your damage dealt, Fiery Brand spreads, Fiery Brand lasts longer, and then what do you have down here? You have Fiery Brand has a 45-second cooldown and an additional charge. Well, in Shadowlands, it was like under a 30-second cooldown if you were really slamming your rotation well. You can never get back to that now, unless they totally redesign the way that this works, which could happen in a future patch, but I don't think it's happening anytime soon. So that just invalidates so much of the stuff that's over here. This fixed 45-second cooldown, just too long, especially considering how consistently great these talents over here are. Now let's take a look at the Raid single target build. As you can see, I have dropped some of the utility options over here: Imprison, Consume Magic. Unfortunately, you have to take one of these 3 options, either Consume Magic, Bouncing Glaive, or Improve Disrupt, to get down here and get Aura of Pain. You could just forego Aura of Pain. It is, you know, 6% more crit on Immolation Aura. It doesn't add up to a ton. And it's not like most of the time you're getting any value out of a talent like added interrupt rotation or added interrupt range in Raid. You usually aren't interrupting, but for the situations where you are, it's pretty valuable. The problem is there's not like a lot of great things that you could take in its place. You could come over and take Precise or Concentrated Sigils and potentially Fell Fire Haste just to get the tiniest bit more mobility. That's about all the value you're gonna get, is just Concentrated Sigils or Precise Sigils, whichever you prefer. This is very much a judgment call on the choice of the player. And you just have to basically play with both of them and choose which one you like. I like Concentrated Sigils a little more personally, just because I'm more comfortable with knowing where I am, the center of my body, than where the center of the mob is. But that's up to you. But yeah, you can give a little bit of damage up to get a little bit of quality of life. I think that just sort of taking kind of a dud talent and then getting, you know, this quality of life over there, or this damage over here, is better than this very small amount of movement speed. Over in the right tree, I have dropped Spirit Bomb. For anything single target, 2 target-ish, I think Spirit Bomb is a little bit of bait. I know some people will still try to run Spirit Bomb in single target, and that's fine. You know, if you're comfortable with that rotation, You can make it work. You're just able to get a lot more frailty stacks, and frailty gives you healing, leech. It gives you, with this, damage increase, and with this, it gives you damage reduction. So you want to get as many stacks as you possibly can rolling all the time. And if you're just playing a Soul Cleave build, you're able to stack it a lot faster than you are if you're playing Spirit Bomb. Sure, with Spirit Bomb you do more AoE damage, but if you're in single target, that doesn't matter. So this is a pretty great approach. One talent that I hadn't pointed out here is Soulmonger. I think this can be okay in raids, especially for bosses where you're taunt swapping back and forth. Being able to like start off a taunt swap with a big shield stacked up, it's okay. I would rather have the extra damage of Soul Cleave out of Focus Cleave most of the time, but if I was worried about defenses at all, I think Soulmonger is not bad, even though I've definitely heard some people say it's kind of bait, and it is a little bit. Being able to have a shield up when you go into a taunt swap, or maybe a boss starts casting on some raid members, and you're able to get a nice little shield up, that can add up. That might be able to save your bacon a little bit. I did drop extended spikes for raid. I think generally if it's single target fight, you're going to be swapping the boss back and forth quite a bit more, so having that extra duration on it loses a little bit of value, and you usually take quite a bit more like magic damage in those situations. So Painbringer, a little bit more value, certainly a lot more consistent in raid. Not as much burst damage reduction, but whatever. And now let's just take a look at the raid AoE build. Pretty similar to the Mythic Plus build, sort of a nice little hybrid of the Mythic Plus and the raid builds, where I'm dropping these utility points, not taking Sigil of Misery, not really going for any extra CC. I am coming down here to get Aura of Pain. In AoE, I definitely want to have Aura of Pain. Crit chance on MO Aura, first off, it's just good damage. Second of all, it interacts nicely with Volatile Flame Blood, give you more resource generation. Good to have both, especially against a bunch of targets. Obviously, I'm going to take Spirit Bomb, which means I would like to have Burning Blood. You'll notice I haven't taken Extended Spikes or Painbringer here. Instead, I've just come down and said, I'm going to kind of take the gamble option of Last Resort. And then still sticking with all the classics. Soul Crush, you're basically playing the class wrong if you're not taking Soul Crush. Like, not to be that absolutist about it, but Frailty overlapping so that you can have 2, 4, 6, 8, however many stacks of Frailty you can put on is like absolutely vital, and it is entirely contingent on this talent. So this is the must-have of all must-haves in the entire set of both trees. Soul Carver is optional, but not really. It's a pretty big damage increase. Just the amount of souls that you get out of it. You get 5 souls over 3 seconds. Like, that's pretty great, and it really synergizes beautifully with Spirit Bomb. You can like Spirit Bomb, Soul Cleave, Soul Carver, and then whatever, hit Immolation Aura, and then tap another Spirit Bomb out, and you've just blasted like 10 stacks of Painbringer, which I guess I'm not talented into, but whatever, 10 stacks of Soul Fragment consumption, all that damage, all that healing in such a short span of time. Pretty great. If you did find yourself struggling at all defensively, there's some pretty easy talents to give up. You could drop, well, you wouldn't want to brick your tree, but you could drop Last Resort. Although with not having 2 points of Burning Blood or Extended Spikes, I guess you have to go this way to get Volatile Flame Blood. So you could drop Last Resort and get 1 point in Painbringer. You could drop Soul Furnace, although this is pretty great damage increase. You could drop Calcified Spikes. It's a pretty nice talent to have, though. Meteoric Strikes probably makes the most sense as the talent to drop here. It's not usually that common to have that much AoE damage and high mobility in a raid fight. You're generally not leaping around a whole bunch with a bunch of mobs following you around. I can think of one fight where there's a lot of movement requirements in it and a lot of AoE damage, and that would be Broodlord Dathia, I think her name is, but you're not moving and doing damage at the same time most of the time during that fight. So I think this would be the approach if you wanted to get that more consistent damage reduction. But I've gone just for raid. I've gone more with the extra cheat death of last resort, and meteoric strikes, just as something a little different. I have continued to hang on to soul sigils just for the time being. It's really not a great talent. You could take Unnatural Malice, Relentless Pursuit, you could take Regular Pursuit, you could take any of those for these raid setups where you're much better off taking Darkness. It kind of gives you a free point to put into like Pitch Black or Long Night. I'm just still going with soul sigils because I'm completely on the copium train that they're gonna fix it and it'll be generating a soul fragment for every person that it hits, but there's no way that's happening. They just want this to be one soul fragment total if you hit something with a sigil. Ugh, not very good, but yeah, well, anyway, there it is. Vengeance Demon Hunters are a lot like an onion or lasagna. They have layers and layers and layers. You don't just have self-healing. You don't just have huge defensive cooldowns. You also have Demon Spikes granting you a rolling 10% damage reduction buff when it falls off. You have Frailty granting you a rolling 4% damage reduction buff per stack, and 8% leech and damage per stack as well. You have multiple awesome burst damage cooldowns to use in conjunction with those big Frailty stacks. You can have Painbringer as a rolling 2% damage reduction effect per soul fragment that you've consumed within the last 5 seconds. It ranges anywhere from like 4 to 20% damage reduction at any given moment. You have great damage in AoE. You have really easy burst damage in AoE too. And you also have great damage in single target, finally. And because of all of your leech from Frailty, you have pretty good self-healing. This is all a huge set of changes for Demon Hunters. Throughout Shadowlands and every expansion since they were added, they've really been a very spiky tank. I'm just gonna let that sit there for a little bit. Spiky. Because of their demon spike. But now they're super stable. They had a really good uptime on Fiery Brand if you played the super defensive Fiery Soul legendary build in Shadowlands, and if you really played into that defensive playstyle, I thought they were good tanks and raids. Their leech made them pretty good in Mythic Plus, their AoE damage was good in Mythic Plus, but you had to be smart and play around the gaps in your defenses, and they were there. Now you have so many layers of defense rolling at any given time, those concerns about gaps are a thing of the past. Previously, meta would fall off, you'd use Demon Spikes, and then you'd get attacked for like half of your health in a single swing, so you'd Soul Cleave and it's not Death Strike, you're getting back like 10% of your health. It just wasn't great if you didn't have cooldowns available, while you were tanking anything particularly dangerous. You had really good uptime by the end of the expansion on defensive cooldowns, but you couldn't always have something going. All those concerns are a thing of the past. You just have good baseline defenses now. The lots of little things that are in the talent tree add up very quickly. And if all else fails, you still have a pretty good built-in cheat death effect available, and it's relatively cheap to get. So is Demon Hunter good? I've said before that in the Shadowlands pre-patch, I think Vengeance is probably the best tank in the game all around. As things stand now, I think they maybe are a step behind Warriors and Dragonflight just because they take more physical damage than Warriors do, and so they need a little more healing than a Warrior. However, they are great. Don't let me undersell Demon Hunters at all. They are an extremely powerful tank. They can do everything. And they're super easy to pick up and play. A lot like Warriors. Managing Frailty stacks and using your cooldowns effectively is a metagame that has some depth to it, but even if you're a total beginner and you just want to log in, slap some buttons, and yeehaw, Vengeance Demon Hunter is the tank for you. It also has a couple of pretty big advantages over Warriors when it comes to dealing with spell damage and unavoidable damage over time mechanics. First off, Demon Hunter just has like 10% more health than a Warrior does, and has more built-in spell damage reduction as well. You can't reflect spells, you can't block spells, but you will passively mitigate more spell damage, and you have that 10% bigger health bar, so you're able to just soak up more spell hits in the first place. On top of all of that, you have Metamorphosis, which gives you an extra 50% life just to really push your health bar out into the realm of absurdity. Like, just sitting around in Orgrimmar in meta form, I'm over 700,000 health on my beta Demon Hunter. Absolutely insane. And on top of that, you have Frailty, Painbringer, and Calcified Spikes, which are 3 different percentage damage reduction effects. They do not care what type of damage you're taking. They work on everything the same, so you will take a lot less spell damage than a warrior does. Beyond the straightforward combat stuff, Demon Hunter now has some of the highest mobility in the history of the game. You don't just have Infernal Strike, you can get its cooldown under 10 seconds, you have Vengeful Retreat now, you have the Hunt for a 50-yard charge that does a ton of damage, you can talent into Fellblade if you want a kinda bad charge that's only 15 yards, you can take Pursuit for more baseline move speed, like 10% or so. You get 20% more move speed while Immolation Aura is up, which is around 75% of the time. It is absolutely crazy how mobile Demon Hunters are. You also have some of the best AoE CC options available, with Chaos Nova and Sigil of Misery as options around the middle of the class tree, and Sigil of Silence as potentially a 48-second cooldown, 10-second AoE silence. That is absolutely bananas in Mythic Plus. Caster mobs will never have a chance. You still maintain great group utility in the form of a 5% magic damage debuff, a single target dispel, a ranged interrupt, and a direct CC that reduces enemy aggro radius so that you can use it, to skip around humanoids, beasts, and demons. And finally, on top of all this great stuff, the class just looks really cool. It's fast, it's fun, it's strong, it's pretty forgiving, it doesn't have really any sort of procs in the rotation, and it's cool. What more could you want? I am really happy with the state of Demon Hunters going into Dragonflight. I think a lot of players are ranking them as their go-to tank if anything happens to warriors between now and release, and I think that's a pretty fair assessment. Their rotation is a lot more static than warriors, which makes them quite a bit more forgiving and more reliable. You're still going to have some variability due to soul fragment spawns not being 100% consistent, but you're not constantly watching for a major rotational skill to reset its cooldown either. Your main abilities are pretty much constant, your offensive and defensive cooldowns are fairly consistent and very strong, and you just have tons of defensive, either skills or passive bonuses active all the time, which is a huge change and a great change. Vengeance Demon Hunter is looking really strong in Dragonflight, and I love playing it. It's the total package. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.